Hey, everybody, fascinating discussion today as we talk about digital trust and cryptographic security done right with an innovator in the field at Keyfactor. Chris, how are you?
I am very well, thank you. Yourself?
Doing great. Thanks so much for joining. Really intrigued for this discussion. Before that, maybe introduce yourself, your background, and what's the big idea at Keyfactor?
Yeah, so Chris Hickman, Chief Security Officer at Keyfactor. Keyfactor is an organization that helps our customers ultimately establish and manage digital trust at scale. Our view of the world is everything is connected and everything needs an identity, and that identity should be cryptographically derived. And in order to accomplish good identity and good security across all of these many use cases at play, those identities need to be managed, and organizations need to become ultimately very agile around how they manage those cryptographic assets.
Yeah, indeed. And, trust is all the news these days, digital trust as well. But beyond the buzzwords, what does digital trust really mean to you and the team at Keyfactor?
Well, it means establishing a unique identity for everything in your organization that's connected. I come from the background. We were just talking a little bit prior to starting about some of our adventures where our paths may have crossed, and I started in the world of PKI back 20 some years ago. I hate to finish the sum part, but to me, the world is protected today with all of our online transactions using digital certificates. Digital certificates are a form of identity that have been proven at scale and time again. To me has always been around being able to get that digital certificate to a device, to an application, to a person, to a machine, and then being able to uniquely identify that as it sort of goes through the operations it does, and ultimately to provide security within the channel too, over things like TLS and other protocols that are there designed to secure communications.
Indeed. And so PKI and certificate management, super fundamental. As geeks, we kind of talk about them and they touch everything. But how do you explain the real world importance, significance to business leaders who may not be steeped in PKI?
Yeah, it really is about having trust, ultimately, of what's talking to what, and having trust that those communications remain confidential. Be that in an application, for instance, where somebody's coming to your website and placing an order, and the little lock pops up in the browser. That's PKI at work, over across of top of TLS. Inside your organization, it's how your machines connect to your Wi-Fi securely. How machines know which machines to be able to talk to. All of that is part of that same trust infrastructure, and understanding what should be allowed to talk to what. So if somebody brings in a device that's not authorized on the network, how do you prevent that from communicating? Again, PKI is a large part of that backbone that we sort of use every day, but don't necessarily actually realize that it's being used every day.
Indeed. And we're on the cusp of a quantum computing, quantum networking revolution.
Yep.
And super exciting, but also threats in quantum are coming fast. How do you think about preparing, cryptographic infrastructure for this tsunami that we're facing?
I'm glad you used the term tsunami, because it's one that I've personally used a few times. Organizations that have not started planning are really behind at this juncture. NIST has recommended that RSA and ECC, which are the two prevailing algorithms that we use, underlying, be phased out by 2030, 2035 in a couple of exception cases. There's been a lot of legislation across the globe where different geographic regions, APAC, Australia recently released their guidance, Canada, so on and so forth, who are all sort of moving towards that 2030 target. But in order to undertake such a massive change in cryptography, because if we think about cryptography, it's not just replacing a digital certificate or replacing my phone. This is not a hardware upgrade. It's not a software upgrade. It's an entire infrastructure change. So things like cryptographic libraries, so on and so forth, all need to change, and it all needs to be done sort of in a seamless way. And it really starts with organizations just being able to figure out what they've got. So cryptographic inventory, being able to see how big the problem is, and I can guarantee you, the analogy I use is a spotlight. Or a flashlight versus turning on the lights in the room, right? We tend to look for things with a flashlight a lot of the times, but in this particular case, we've got to turn on the lights and realize that there's a lot of cryptography in our organization, see it all, realize it's probably a little bit messy, and then start taking a risk-based approach to how I can do that migration to post-quantum cryptography, because not doing it is not an option.
Oh, really well said. And looking at the Keyfactor website, you talk a lot about crypto agility, a big focus of yours. What does that look like in action beyond the marketing hype?
Well, it's actually interesting because NIST is actually working on a paper to better define that right now, and they've got a couple of drafts out that are well worth giving a read to. But at its fundamental level, it's really about organizations being able to be agile with cryptographic assets. Traditionally, a lot of cryptography comes into the organization. We sort of treat it like a checkbox on an RFP, right? Do you support this? Yes, no, move on, file it. In 7 years, shred it. But we've never taken inventory of where all this stuff is inside of our organization. So it's not only the ability to see it, but then the ability to manage it downstream. And as NIST begins to look at what that really means in an organization, some of their guidance is very practical, like, find it, swap out your cryptographic libraries. You're going to need to be at TLS 1.3 in order to do post-quantum, so on and so forth. That's all very practical advice and very executable. They're also looking at it sort of more from a visionary standpoint too, which is how do we take cryptography to an abstraction layer, right? How do we get it out of all of our binaries and executables and embed it everywhere and sort of bring that into a more manageable, seamless layer at the top? Where things just point to that to do crypto, and ultimately that is the vision for agility, but a lot of that is not available today. We're still sort of stuck just trying to figure out how to move Lego bits around in order to build a slightly new crypto landscape.
Lego is a great analogy, and speaking of Lego, my kids used to have Legos sprawled around the floor everywhere, and you'd step on it and it would hurt tremendously. I think most companies don't realize how messy certificate sprawl is as well until something breaks, until you step on your Lego. So how do you clean this up? How do you get ahead of that?
Well, like I said, first thing is just to turn on the lights and see the Lego on the floor. We're going to continue with that analogy. Make sure you don't step on it, but pick it up. It's about reshaping how different protocols are going to be used. So NIST is standardized on a set of post-quantum protocols now. The guidance is out to replace them. Organizations need to be doing things from a couple different angles. I've already talked about the inventory and that piece, which is absolutely important. But they then need to assess risk against technology. In the post-quantum world, there's this notion of harvest now, decrypt later, or steal now, decrypt later. It's a very real thing where organizations are having their data stolen, even though it's encrypted, for decryption later. Tends to be longer term data, tends to have high value. Think in terms of customer records, IP, things of the sort. The so-called keys to the kingdom for a lot of businesses. Assess what the risk is of having that stolen today. If that were to leave your organization, what would the impact be? Maybe those are the things you need to start to protect first, because you can't do everything all at once. And then move on from there and sort of move through that risk-based layer, and then continuously monitor to make sure new stuff is not coming into your environment. And my practical advice for organizations too, if you're not in your procurement cycle now asking your vendors what their post-quantum plans are, think in terms of the fact that some of the things that you're buying today may need to be post-quantum ready prior to 2030, and you may be buying an asset that's going to have a much shorter shelf life than you realize. So really engage with your vendor ecosystem to make sure that all your vendors are on the same page and looking at how to adopt those standards and what their timelines are, so that you can have visibility into how to make that transition.
Very cool. So this is the year of resilience and managing risk, it seems. What's the hardest part of securing identities, not just for people, but when you have these machines and millions of them?
It's It's not a technology problem. In a lot of cases,
Mm,
it's a policy and process problem. I mean, the
mm,
technology is there, it's proven at scale. It's about to get tested again as we
mm.
see things like agentic AI come onto the radar for a lot of organizations, which will push scale in a way that a lot of traditional non-PKI identity solutions will struggle to keep up. But it's really one of making sure that you've got the right foundation, right? This is basic construction, right? You need a good solid foundation upon which to build, and security is obviously an important part of that foundation, and PKI is one of the foundational building blocks to good security, both in enterprise and also in product. So it transcends not just this is not just an enterprise use case. There's an IoT component to this. If you're building a product that's going to have a 20-year life and has security built in, same fundamentals apply around needing to be agile, being able to understand what the cryptography is, and then being able to manage that accordingly. So it really does transcend all verticals, all solution sets.
Yeah, when I think about the number of devices with IP identities that I have just on my body, my smart glasses from Ray-Ban, my Aura Ring, my phone,
Mm-hmm.
it's on and on. So it's really life impacting as well. You must have so many stories, anecdotes around when certificate or key issues became a real lesson learned in the real world, probably most of which you can't really talk about, but any anecdotes you can share?
Yeah, I will point back to a few. We still, in the PKI world, tend to miss the simple things.
Mm.
Yeah, if we were really as a collective body good at managing certificates, there would never be a headline that says Microsoft Teams went down due to a certificate outage, or Starlink went down because a cert expired in the ground station. And the reason I like to sort of call those out is because if you've got infinite wealth and infinite resources and you're still not paying attention to the little things that can impact your business that way, what are other people supposed to do that may not have access to those resources the same way? Well, there are answers and there are solutions. It's just to your point earlier, how does the C-suite engage in a conversation? Well, they don't until they're forced to, because they're looking at other priorities. Business resilience and cryptographic resilience has to become, and is thankfully starting to become, one of those conversations that is starting to happen within those boardrooms, and we are starting to see that change take place. Post-quantum is pushing some of that today, where there's new risks that boards, for instance, are having to look at, and they do come down to that cryptographic layer.
Yeah, great point. Speaking of which, you deal with boards, you talk to board members. Everyone's focused on the bottom line and kind of pinching pennies. How do you make the case for investing in PKI and trust infrastructure when the ROI isn't always visible? It's like plumbing. You don't really invest in your plumbing until the pipes burst.
Exactly. You're 100% correct. But we are absolutely. So there's a couple things happening in the industry that are really pushing the conversation. We've talked about post-quantum as an example. We haven't really talked about the fact that publicly rooted certificates, the CAB forum voted to move those down to 47-day renewals from the current 398 days. A few years ago, that was 5 years. So, if you look at what the additional cost is of just trying to manage those without automation and good certificate lifecycle management, as an example, your costs are going exponentially higher. They're going 12x from what they currently are today. And that 12x is all in people running around having to do manual things with certificates, which does not scale. And you're introducing 12 times the number of mistakes that could be made.
Wow.
Deploying those, right? So there is a conversation to be had around ROI. There is a conversation to be had around operational efficiency, and the visibility that organizations should have to understand what it is it's running. Because at the end of the day, a single certificate goes down, it takes out something like Teams or Starlink, or your organization might be your Wi-Fi, might be your web services, might be your mobile apps, things of the sort. So there is a huge impact to making sure that there is operational efficiency built into the framework around these digital certificates.
Great point. The other thing that's constantly evolving is regulations around data and encryption per country, per U.S. state, even, for example, California versus Massachusetts. what's keeping you or CSOs in general up right now around that and compliance?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a much higher standard for compliance. We're a global business. We see it, for instance, with DORA in the EU. We're seeing some very strong initiatives out of Asia Pac. We're seeing some fragmentation as well. Again, around post-quantum, where organizations are setting the bar, or countries are setting a bar. There is, this sort of notion of cryptographic sovereignty that's starting to come into play and things of the sort with some of the new standards. Yes, we're going to support, library ABC, but our own flavor of it. How does that all work from a compatibility standpoint? All of that still needs to be sort of flushed out in that post-quantum migration. But we are starting to, countries are paying attention to cryptography in a way that they haven't traditionally. And we're starting to see a trend towards stronger regulation, both from government and from industry. So we see, for instance, in things like PCI, the new requirements have a piece around being able to manage your cryptography, and that will only become more and more complex. And then auditors are picking up on these things, of course, and the auditors are saying, "Hey, I need to know more about this. Do you have visibility into what you're really doing, and help me understand how you would respond to an incident in this space, so I can give you the appropriate checkboxes." So it is sort of an evolutionary process that's happening.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So just to wrap it up, looking ahead, where do you see the biggest shift coming in how organizations build and maintain trust in the digital world over the next, couple, 3, 5 years? Do you see a world of autonomous networks and networking that might help alleviate some of the burden here?
So I do, but I think you leave burden in one place and you perhaps load it in another. I do think that agentic AI is going to be highly impactful in this space. Interestingly enough, agentic AI is just another use case for PKI. We already know how to do the scale that agentic AI is going to require. The protocols already exist for things like service mesh and things of the sort to be able to do the issuance and all of that thing that needs to happen, right? It's if we think about the scope of agentic AI, it's the equivalent of onboarding 10,000 employees dynamically simultaneously. Perhaps, right? The technology exists to do that and is proven. I really do think that is going to start to push the boundaries of organizations' resilience as it relates to PKI, and those foundations that are built well will withstand that shift. Those foundations that are not built well will crumble under the weight of trying to adopt agentic AI as an identity source and a security backbone, to serve the business needs, whatever they want to deploy agents for.
Fascinating. Well, thanks so much for all the insight and updates, and continue the important work onwards and upwards.
Great. Thank you so much for having me be your guest today.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks everyone for listening, watching, sharing this episode. And be sure to check out our new TV show, TechImpact.tv, now on Bloomberg TV and Fox Business. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.